Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage the Vault Series. Today's clip was shot back in September of 2009 in Los Angeles. I went over to the great Steve Porcaro's house. We set up in his studio, and Steve talked about how he became a musician and became part of the great group Toto and a great session musician as well. Some of the records he played on, such as Michael Jackson and some of the songs that he even wrote for Michael Jackson. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. Once again, Steve Porcaro.
Hi, I'm Steve Porcaro. I'm a founding member of Toto, and I was 1957. I was born into a musical family in Hartford, Connecticut. My dad's a drummer. My mom played flute, and when I was about 9 years old, we moved to California. I should back up and tell you that when I was about 5 or 6, myself and my brothers, we saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and in our family it was all classical music and jazz, before that. So the Beatles were like our first band we were aware of, and it just hit us all like a ton of bricks. The songs, the style, the musicianship, everything. And we came to California in 1966. We drove out to LA all together, and it was an incredible time, an incredibly fertile musical time. A lot going on in the studios, and very soon our heroes became not only people in bands, but our heroes soon became a lot of studio musicians. My brother Jeff's favorite drummers were guys like Jim Keltner, Jim Gordon, a lot of those guys, and we all learned very early. We would scour album cover jackets to see who was playing on it, and always had our favorites. I always had bands, and starting in junior high school, I started my first band. And by the time I got to high school, I took over my brother Jeff's band. My brother Jeff and Mike had played in a band in high school, and I kind of took it over. I did the same tunes, the same instrumentation, everything. And then at about 14, my first big paying gig, my first gig away from home was I did a week in Jackpot, Nevada, with a lady named Sally Flynn, who was from the Lawrence Welk Show. And worked for a week, got paid, went to the coffee shop for my nightly cheeseburger, and came back to find all my money gone. My first road experience. Learned a lesson real quick there about leaving your money in your hotel room. Anyway, when I left high school a semester early when I was 17 to go on the road with Gary Wright. Did a couple years of touring with Gary. Went right from Gary to Boz Scaggs. At that time, Jeff and David and David had worked on Boz's album Silk Degrees, and it was quite a success. And they were getting ready to go out on the road. And David Paich thought I'd be perfect to cover his synth parts, the synth overdubs. And so thus began me kind of sliding on my older brothers and David's coattails there into the music business. That started a long relationship between me and David Paich. And the guys just showed me the ropes and had me program for them on their sessions. And when other people were looking for someone to do, especially specialized in synthesizers, I would get the call. I started getting quite a lot of calls, and I just loved it. And out of Boz's band, out of that live band, which originally was, I think was that original rhythm section of David Hungate, David Paich, and Jeff Porcaro, and that kind of became the genesis of Toto. And even my brother Mike toured with Boz also. So we've all kind of had all of our roots there. And pretty much Toto was this touring band. And we just, we never had to audition or showcase or anything like that. CBS or Columbia, who was Boz's record label, saw us, knew that David had written a lot of the songs with Boz on the Silk Degrees album, and thus Toto was born. And this session work just kept continuing, too, through all that, We were having a ball. We were always very busy, and got to play and work with a lot of amazing artists. I've always loved my job doing sessions. I take great pride in how hard we worked and the records we made, and especially with Toto, all the work we did. I'm very proud of all that stuff.
And you wrote for other people too. I know you wrote. Co-wrote Human Nature.
Yeah, I had a couple Toto songs, but my big song outside of Toto was Human Nature on the Thriller album. And they released the 25th anniversary of Thriller, and Michael, this is about a year before he passed away, added another song of mine, which we recorded several years ago, called For All Time. It's on the Thriller 25.
What did you start out at, or when did you know you wanted to be a musician?
Oh, pretty early on. I took piano lessons real young. I was a terrible student. I was real lucky where, in my dad being a professional musician in the studios here in Hollywood, he would barter with his friends. He would teach their kids drum lessons, and I would take piano lessons from some studio pianists and studio keyboard players, some of which were amazing musicians, but maybe they weren't the best teachers. They didn't really have a curriculum together, and sometimes it was kind of loosey-goosey, but I loved it that way. And I took from several different teachers. I took from Victor Feldman at one point. My dad taught his son drums, Claire Fisher, Pete Robinson. I had a lot of different teachers, a lot of great session players, in the studios. So that was a great experience. And when I knew was I knew it in junior high and, junior high, or a little bit even before, maybe even 6th grade, 7th grade, I knew what I wanted to do. I was always watching my older brothers, Mike and Jeff, and, they were getting gigs on the road. Jeff took off with Sonny and Cher. Mike was on the road with Seals and Crofts for years, and I just wanted to be out on the road playing music in front of people,
What was your first studio encounter?
It's kind of hard to say because, boy, I got to think about that. That's not clear because I've always was in the studio so much, whether I was just hanging out with my father, I'd go with my dad all the time. I'd go with my older brother Jeff all the time to just about everything he did. I'd show up, My first session, God, that's a good question. I should think about what my first real session was, It was early on. I had learned, I personally had realized as I was coming up, I wanted to be a keyboard player, but I realized as I started getting older and into high school, looking around, and there's David Foster and David Paich and Michael O'Mardian and these guys who are my absolute heroes. And I never had the work ethic as far as my practicing went to compare with those guys, let alone the talent. But I saw early on there was this niche with synthesizers, and I was real interested in that stuff. I was interested in the possibilities, and I kind of found my niche there and dug way into it. I figured if I'm going to be a synth guy, I'm going to be as good as I can be at it, and maybe it seemed to me at the time that the best players, the very best players, were guys who really weren't interested in reading manuals, and best players were playing. They were busy playing. They weren't reading synthesizer manuals and getting deep into it. And the best synthesists were these nerds, or you wouldn't want playing a groove on your record, So I kind of saw this opportunity at that certain time that I went for. I was very I had this laser focus, like that was what I was going to go after. And I wound up getting to play on all these great records with a lot of other keyboard players, with David Foster, with David Paich. They would bring me along and let me come up with some parts and get sounds for them, and I had a ball doing it.
Did you do the Dreamweaver? Was that?
I did not do the record at all. I didn't do the album at all, but David Foster did. And David had been working with, had just done the Dreamweaver album with Gary Wright, and Gary was looking for a keyboard player. Keyboard players to go on the road. He was doing an all-keyboard band along with drums, and I had known David and had been starting a program for him, and he had Gary give me the call. And
what did you think about being on the road in front of? And what was that like your first time you were in front of?
Oh, it was amazing. It was my Beatles on the Wet Sullivan on the.
Yeah.
Could edit that out. I was going to say it's my Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Wet Dream Come True. don't think you should keep that, but you know what I mean. That's exactly what it was. Because with Gary right away, I mean, Gary was just Gary had been in Spooky Tooth for years. He was a known musician. Played with George Harrison a lot. Played on a lot of George's stuff. But this was a big breakout hit for him. But we were traveling. We were opening for Amazing. We were opening for Jethro Tull. We'd open for Hall & Oates. We were all over the place. Our very first gigs were opening for Mountain and 10 Years After, But we were all over the place. His management had him, we just did one-nighters and didn't stop, We'd hook up to a tour. Would do Peter Frampton for a few months, and if Peter had a one night off, we'd go off and do a one-nighter at some college town or a club somewhere. It was just kind of nonstop, and it was just amazing experience to see all these bands live, to open for these guys. I always stuck around and would hear the band. I'd watch their shows repeatedly just because I was 17 years old, 18 years old, and in heaven,
That had to be. Everybody, especially a musician, dreams of, like you said, of being in a band like the Beatles or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very few people get the experience to go out and do it, and especially it's just that so many people that are players, want to know what it is to feel like to go out in front of 10, 20,000 people and get the feedback.
It's a blast. It's a blast. The adrenaline you feel when you first go out. We did stadium stuff. We would open, get on these big bills. Bill Graham did these things called Diana Green, these huge concerts at Oakland Stadium, Oakland Coliseum. That would be sold out and playing the stadiums full of people. It's just a complete blast.
So how'd your life change once you had all this start happening for you? Was it, and how do you go from like, we're sitting here now shooting a breeze, and then within an hour you could be in front of 20,000 people, and you have this enormous rush, and then it's over.
Yeah.
Is that weird to deal with, or is that?
Yeah, I guess. At the time, I was having a blast. Now, did I handle my success real well? Hell no. I was young and dumb, and, I was having a good time. Enough said. But it's difficult. It's difficult, like you said, it's difficult adjusting, acclimating to, being in front of 20,000 people and then not, and then being with your kids,
But evidently you did pretty good.
Well, I'm still here. I'm still here. No, that's something I'm proud of, and all of us guys, all through our years on the road, we never, any band we would see in the funkiest Holiday Inn in the most far out town in the world, we'd never think of making fun of anybody who's able to pull it off and make a living doing music is a hero to me. You know what I'm saying? My dad did all kinds of gigs. You know what I mean? He played. He'd work in the studios all week, and he still, it was mostly percussion he was doing. So on the weekends, if he got called to do a wedding or he'd get to play drums, he'd jump at it. Just to be able to play. Just to be able to play.
That's a question. What to you, was there a difference between playing in a little club and playing in a 10,000 seat stadium? I know that obviously there's a different setting, but did you still enjoy playing at the little club as much as you did playing?
Oh, absolutely. Hey, if there's 3 people in front of me, if there's one person there, I get an adrenaline rush, and I'm trying to show off and do my best. You know what I mean? I'm trying to look cool, Absolutely. It didn't matter. You know what I mean? Sometimes, the big crowds is totally daunting, and you know what I mean? When you're in a big, long bill, you're lucky if you get a sound check, and, there's ups and downs to working like that, too. You do miss, with the people so far away, you miss a certain interaction, when it's a huge stadium thing. You're more kind of definitely playing for the exit signs when it's a stadium or an arena type thing.
How did that, that's a pretty great thing that you guys, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons that you got so many votes, was you guys were like musicians like. That's the take that I got from everybody. Was really respected by everybody as musicians, and then you become a hit band. How did that work when here you are now, Steve Porcaro from Toto, and you play on somebody else's session in the daytime? Is that how it worked?
Yeah, that's how it worked. It was because I think we were musicians first. We really were truly studio musicians. Truly, I consider myself a studio rat. I'm not a player like the other guys are. The other guys are really amazing musicians, and you want to hear them play, you want to hear them blow, you want to hear them do their thing. I'm very much a studio kind of rat. I love being a man behind the scenes, and we would easily shift gears. That was never an issue as far as doing a Toto thing and then all of a sudden doing a session. It was just you always working for the guys you're working for. You always want to bring your best game to the table and help them make a record, come up with some parts.
So in the height of the Toto, you never would I don't want to deal with studio. It's like I'm there. No. As things progressed, sure, there was a certain point, especially for me. I mean, the guys like Luke, Hungate, my brother Mike, Paige, Jeff, they were, again, these guys were players, and some of the stuff that I would be asked to do, doing synth sessions, after a while, some of it got tiresome, and I still do sessions, but most of the guys just drop off their files and let me do my thing, or come over here, and it's really changed. Some for the better, a lot for the worse. Believe me, I was one of the first guys who wanted, the solo I did in Rosanna took me 2 weeks to do. The guys wouldn't sit around and watch me do that. I had to do that at a home studio. That's the only way that would exist, and I still like being able to not have anybody watching me and do it's like sausage making, you know what I mean? You really don't want to watch it happen, the way I work. But what I found, believe me, a couple years for me after having my own place, right, and I could completely work alone if I wanted to. I started looking around, going, "Where's everybody?" I just really started missing the camaraderie, the and sometimes even the uncomfortable tension of having to get it done right then and there, and I really started missing that, and I still miss it. I feel bad for guys who have never experienced it, who everyone's got their home studio and they're all isolated in their little satellites doing their overdubbing to a track. I miss everyone getting together and bumping heads and what came out of it. Sometimes it was tough, sometimes it was hard work, but we got stuff done and finished and checked off the list, and I had a lot of fun too. Yeah, I miss it. I think it's sorely lacking these days. Well, a lot of guys say that would be inspired by something somebody else did and it lifted them to another level.
Totally, absolutely. And just the great producers, working with great producers is just a joy. Working with people who that you start having a rapport with and a language with, and they can talk in abstracts and you kind of understand them. They like you because you understand what they say. You know better than to ask them what they mean, what they're asking for. You just kind of say, "No problem," and change things.
Could you talk about a few producers that you work with?
Sure. I mean, probably the best is, that I got to work with quite closely is David Paich. Toto's albums were band produced, but David was pretty much our fearless leader for, the time I was in the band, and I learned a ton from David. I learned a lot from Quincy Jones, working with Quincy. Quincy was amazing. It was amazing to me how he would do a solo album, and he wouldn't play a note on it, he wouldn't write a note on it, he wouldn't arrange anything on it, and yet it was a Quincy Jones album. And started just loving that concept of how he was. It was, you know, he had the autonomy though. He was the boss and got things the way he wanted. And I love, you know, I would disagree sometimes with some of the things I would do or some of the things he would do. But at the end of the day, I would see the wisdom in it. And I learned a lot from Quincy and a lot from David Foster. Did a lot of sessions with David Foster in the earlier part of his career, and learned a lot from him.